One of the basic ways to think about the long history of an industry is to use the colorful metaphor that Joseph Schumpeter coined about 100 years ago called creative destruction. Those kind of in the know that he got all of his ideas for that metaphor from Marx's analysis of British capitalism in the 19th century. But the story of creative destruction is one of how overlapping forms of progress in developing technology and products and the change in where things are made and the change in the nature of capital and the decision makers over time means that some industries that were once mighty, like Maine's paper industry, will be set by a rapid process of decline and a great injury to the people who work in the industry. So I think there's two questions about this kind of story, which is that first of all, is there a way of managing decline so it's not so harmful to human beings who work in the industry? And how much of the decline was really inevitable? And I think what my book does with the case of paper mills in the state of Maine is to sort of say something significant on both accounts. So the core of my story is how a shift in the political economy of American capitalism around 1980 to what I would call the Wall Street takeover of American industry led to an acceleration of decline because basically, as most of your listeners probably know, we've had this model where corporations that lay off workers, shut down operations, do all kinds of financial engineering, can make massive amounts of windfall for shareholders. And I have one case study in there of how Scott Paper was the investors installed this guy named Chainsaw Al Dunlap, who was kind of famous in the 1990s for ripping apart companies and making a lot of money for shareholders. Well, he did this with Scott Paper that included 3 mills owned by Scott in Maine in the mid-1990s. Basically destroyed some very profitable mills that were just out of business shortly after his regime. And then the other part of it was that he pocketed $120 million in windfall and shareholders pocketed $6 million in windfall. So that's part one of the story, like what initiated this? Well, it was the type of the tiny elite that makes decisions for corporations shifting as American political economy turned towards what's been alternatively called shareholder primacy, the idea that you maximize profits for the shareholder. That's the only purpose of a corporation. So in any event, but the other question is like, so could that decline been managed better? And one of the things that I talk about in my book at the very end is two things that might have made a difference. One would have been worker ownership, because the people who worked in the mills, paper mills are unusual as factories because up to this day, workers have an unusual amount of skill and control over the labor process. And what it means is that, more than many other industries with assembly line type workplaces, this was an industry where the workers really did run the mill. And so owning it was not a big leap. And what they saw over the period of the 60s, 70s, and 80s is a sort of new turnstile of outside managers who came in and ran the company very poorly. And sort of, injured brands by making bad decisions on the shop floor. I could go through it, it's a long story. So I think worker ownership would have made a big deal. And one of the paper mills that I feature most, the SD Warren mill outside of Portland, Maine, the workers, in fact, really tried to do that and then were kind of blocked by their owners. I think the other thing that could have made a difference is something called industrial policy, which is like, what we're hearing right now is that the Biden administration wants to invest in a lot of so-called green technology and infrastructure and create manufacturing jobs in the United States. That's the federal government targeting industry to support well-paid employment. So I make a case that the competing countries around the world that sort of ate the lunch of the American industry had the benefit of that, and our workers did not.